Chapter 1, Failed First Marriage. Ah, life is a curious thing, isn't it? It weaves a tapestry of joy and pain, love and loss, all bound together by the choices we make and the paths we walk. My first marriage, Evelyn Toko Mays, a woman of quiet strength and deep faith, was a chapter of my life that taught me lessons I could not have learned any other way. We met in the bustling streets of Johannesburg, in the shadow of apartheid's cruel machinery. Evelyn was a nurse, a healer by nature and by calling. Her gentleness was like a balm to my restless soul. When I married her, I thought I could have it all, a family, a home, and a burning mission to free my people. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Evelyn was a deeply religious woman. Her faith was her anchor, her compass, her refuge. She wanted a husband who would kneel beside her in prayer, who would find solace in the same scriptures she did. But I was a man consumed by a different calling. The fight against apartheid was not just a cause to me, it was the very air I breathed. And so, the cracks began to show. I remember coming home late, night after night, my mind buzzing with strategies and plans. Evelyn would be waiting, her face a mixture of worry and frustration. "Nelson," she'd say, "why can't you leave the politics outside the door? Why can't you be here, with us, with your family?" But how could I explain to her that the struggle was not something I could leave behind? That every injustice I saw, every story of suffering I heard, felt like a personal wound? We were two ships, Evelyn and I, sailing in opposite directions. Her heart yearned for a simple, peaceful life, a husband, a home, a family rooted in faith. My heart was set on the stormy seas of revolution, on dismantling a system that dehumanized millions. I remember one argument in particular. It was late, and I had just returned from a meeting. Evelyn was waiting for me, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "You are married to the struggle, Nelson," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. "Not to me. Not to this family." And she was right. In those moments, I saw the pain I was causing her. But I also knew that I could not, would not, abandon the fight. How could I sit idly by, enjoying the comforts of family life, while my brothers and sisters were suffering under the yoke of apartheid? In the end, our differences proved too great. In 1958, after 13 years of marriage, Evelyn and I parted ways. It was a painful decision, one that left scars on both our hearts. But I believe it was necessary. Evelyn deserved a life of peace and love, and I needed to walk the path I had chosen, no matter how lonely it might be. Looking back now, I see the echoes of that time in every decision I've made since. Evelyn taught me the cost of commitment, the weight of sacrifice. She reminded me that even the most righteous cause can leave wounds in its wake. So, to Evelyn, wherever she may be now, I say this: thank you. Thank you for your love, your patience, and your strength. You were a part of my journey, a part of the man I became. And for that, I will always be grateful. Life is a curious thing, isn't it? A tapestry of joy and pain, love and loss, all bound together. Chapter 2, Estranged Relationships with His Children. My children. My precious children. The very thought of them stirs an ache in my heart, a bittersweet symphony of love and regret. You see, I made a choice to stand against the tyranny of apartheid, to dedicate my life to the liberation of my people. But that choice came at a cost I carry with me to this day. When I think of my children, I see their faces as they were before my imprisonment, so full of life, curiosity, and innocence. Thembekile, my firstborn, was the apple of my eye. Thembi had a quiet strength about him, a confidence that belied his years. I imagined a future for him where he could walk freely in the land of his birth, unshackled by the chains of racism. But I was not there to guide him, to see him grow into the man he was meant to be. Prison is a cruel thief, robbing you not only of your freedom but also of the moments that make a life. Birthdays came and went, milestones passed uncelebrated. I was reduced to a name on a letter, a voice carried through prison walls. And even then, the letters were censored, the words I longed to say cut short by the hand of an unseen jailer. Thembi's death, Thembi's death was a blow I cannot describe. It was 1969, and I was still confined on Robben Island. The news came like a thunderclap, sudden and devastating. My boy, my firstborn, had died in a car accident. He was only 24. I remember standing there, holding the letter in my hands, the words blurring before my eyes. The pain was like a dagger to the heart, sharp and unrelenting. And yet, even in that moment of unbearable grief, the cruelty of the system did not relent. I begged for permission to attend his funeral. I wrote letters, pleaded with the authorities, appealed to their humanity. But humanity was in short supply in those days. My request was denied. Imagine, if you can, the torment of a father unable to bury his own son. To know that your child has been laid to rest, and you were not there to say goodbye. It is a wound that never truly heals. And my other children, how could they not feel the weight of my absence? I was a ghost in their lives, a figure they heard about but rarely saw. They grew up without their father, navigating a world that was cruel and unjust, with only fragments of my love to hold on to. When I was finally released, I found that time had not stood still. My children were grown, with lives and struggles of their own. Rebuilding those relationships was not easy. There were questions, resentments, silences that spoke louder than words. I do not blame them for their pain. How could I? I made a choice that I believed was for the greater good. But that choice left scars on those I loved the most. If I could speak to Thembi now, I would tell him how much I loved him, how proud I was of him, and how deeply I mourned his loss. To my other children, I would say, I am sorry. I am sorry for the years we lost, for the moments I missed, for the father I could not be. But I would also tell them this: I fought for a world where no parent would have to make the choices I made. Where no child would grow up in the shadow of oppression, and no family would be torn apart by the cruelty of a system that dehumanizes us all. My children. My precious children. You are the reason I fought, the reason I endured. And though the past cannot be undone, I carry you with me, always, in my heart. Chapter 3, Struggles in His Marriage to Winnie Mandela. Monologue, Nelson Mandela reflecting on his marriage to Winnie Mandela. Winnie. Winnie Madikizela Mandela. She was a force of nature, a woman of fierce determination and unyielding strength. When I met her, I was captivated, not just by her beauty, though she was radiant, but by her spirit. She was unafraid, unbroken, even in the face of the oppressive weight of apartheid. I thought to myself, here is someone who understands the fight, someone who will stand beside me in the storm. And stand beside me, she did. When I was imprisoned, it was Winnie who carried the torch. She became the voice of the voiceless, the face of the struggle. She endured harassment, imprisonment, and exile, yet she refused to be silenced. I cannot overstate what her courage meant to me during those long, lonely years behind bars. Knowing that she was out there, fighting not just for me but for our people, gave me strength when I thought I had none left. But time is a relentless adversary. 27 years is a lifetime. It changes people, reshapes them in ways they do not even realize. The man who walked out of Victor Verster prison in 1990 was not the same man who had walked in, and Winnie. Winnie had become someone I could barely recognize. She had lived through horrors I could only imagine. The constant surveillance, the arrests, the torture, the isolation, it left its mark. Her anger, her defiance, her willingness to do whatever it took to fight the enemy, these were the traits that had kept her alive and strong. But they were also the traits that began to drive a wedge between us. We tried, oh, how we tried, to find our way back to each other. But the world we returned to was not the same. The movement had grown, evolved, and so had we. Winnie had become a symbol in her own right, a leader with her own following, her own way of doing things. And I was trying to navigate the delicate transition from revolutionary to statesman. Our differences became more pronounced with each passing day. There were whispers, of infidelity, of misconduct, of actions taken in the name of the struggle that I could not condone. And there were silences, long and heavy, where words should have been. I will not deny that there were moments of anger, of frustration, of deep sorrow. How could it be that after all we had endured, after the separation, the sacrifices, the shared dream of a free South Africa, we could not find a way to hold on to each other? In 1996, after 38 years of marriage, we made the painful decision to part ways. It was not a decision made lightly, nor without regret. I mourned the loss of what we had, of what we could have been. But I also knew that holding on, when the bond had been irreparably strained, would only bring more pain. Even now, as I look back, I hold no bitterness in my heart for Winnie. She was, and always will be, a part of my story, a part of the struggle that defined our lives. She stood when others would have fallen. She fought when others would have surrendered. And for that, I will always respect her. But love, love is a fragile thing, is it not? It can endure the harshest storms, but sometimes, it cannot survive the quiet erosion of time and circumstance. To Winnie, I would say this: thank you. Thank you for your strength, your courage, your unwavering belief in the fight for freedom. Though our paths diverged, you were my partner in the most turbulent, transformative years of my life. Ah, Winnie. A force of nature, indeed. A chapter of my life I will never forget. Chapter 4: Conflict and Violence in Early Activism. Monologue: Nelson Mandela reflecting on the conflict and violence of early activism. Ah, the days of Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation. Those were days of fire and fury, of impossible choices and heavy burdens. It was a time when the world seemed to demand answers from us that no one should ever have to give. I did not come to the path of armed resistance lightly. No, it was not in my nature to advocate for violence. I believed in dialogue, in peaceful protest, in the power of persuasion to win hearts and minds. But what does one do when the doors of negotiation are slammed shut, when every peaceful avenue is met with brutality and bloodshed? We marched. We protested. We called for justice. And in return, we were met with bullets, batons, and the unyielding machinery of apartheid. How many of my brothers and sisters had to fall before we realized that words alone would not break the chains that bound us? I remember the meeting where we made the decision to form Umkhonto we Sizwe. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken fears. I looked around at my comrades, men and women who had sacrificed so much already, and I asked myself, can we do this? Can we take this step and still look ourselves in the mirror? The answer was not simple. But it was clear. We did not choose violence for its own sake. No, we chose sabotage, targeted, deliberate acts designed to cripple the machinery of oppression without taking lives. We wanted to send a message, to make the regime understand that we would not be silenced, that we would not stand idly by while our people were crushed under their heel. But violence, violence is a beast that cannot be tamed. Once unleashed, it takes on a life of its own, spilling over in ways you cannot control. There were times when the line between resistance and recklessness blurred, when the actions of the few threatened to undermine the principles we fought for. And yet, I stand by the choices we made. Not because they were easy, but because they were necessary. The apartheid regime was not a government that could be reasoned with. It was a system built on the dehumanization of an entire people, and it used violence as its first and final language. We had to speak in terms it could understand. Do I have regrets? Of course. Any man who has seen the cost of conflict, who has witnessed the pain and suffering it brings, cannot help but carry regrets. There were lives lost, lives I will mourn for the rest of my days. And there were moments when I questioned whether we could have done things differently, whether we could have found another way. But I also know this: the struggle for freedom is never clean, never simple. It is a messy, painful, and deeply human endeavor. To those who criticize our methods, I would ask, what would you have done? If your people were being slaughtered, your land stolen, your dignity stripped away, what would you have done to fight back? Even now, as I reflect on those turbulent years, I do so with a heart that is both heavy and hopeful. Heavy for the lives that were lost, the wounds that were inflicted. Hopeful for the nation that rose from the ashes, a nation that chose reconciliation over revenge. Umkhonto we Sizwe was born out of necessity, not desire. It was a weapon forged in the fire of oppression, wielded with the hope that one day, we would no longer need it. And when that day came, when we laid down our arms and chose the path of peace, I felt a weight lift from my soul. Ah, the days of fire and fury. They shaped me, as they shaped us all. And though they are behind us, their lessons remain. Freedom, I have learned, is never given, it is won. And it is won at a cost.